Imagine stepping into a lavish penthouse suite on the Upper East Side, where champagne glasses sparkle under crystal chandeliers, and hushed secrets lurk in every polished corner. In this glittering world of wealth, power, and privilege, one man's perfect life shatters when his alluring mistress demands the unthinkable. The resulting storm of betrayal and deceit turns his once idyllic marriage into a battlefield with a high-stakes divorce at its core. But just when he believes he's sacrificed everything for love, he discovers a new and more devastating truth that the mistress who demanded his soul plans to vanish with all of his riches. Jonathan Rutherford was not always a millionaire. He grew up on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, sharing a cramped apartment with his mother and 2 siblings. His mother, Patricia, was a single parent who worked long hours at a local grocery store, rarely seeing her children during daylight. Nevertheless, she instilled in Jonathan a fiery determination to grasp every opportunity that came his way. By the time Jonathan turned 21, he had already created a small e-commerce business and sold it for a modest profit, fueling his drive to succeed even more. In college, Jonathan met the woman he believed was the love of his life, Evelyn Carter, a bright anthropology major, with a heart that seemed big enough to encompass the entire world. They bonded over midnight study sessions and summer road trips to national parks. Evelyn was kind, generous, and wholly supportive of Jonathan's ambitions. She believed in his dream to expand his online ventures into an empire, and soon after they graduated, they married in a small ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. Their early years of marriage were not glamorous. They lived in a modest apartment and worked tirelessly, Evelyn as a grant writer at a non-profit, Jonathan in the tech startup world. But as Jonathan's business acumen sharpened, so did their fortunes. A breakthrough came when he developed a software platform streamlining supply chain logistics, which garnered attention from major investors, including an early endorsement from Mark Cuban on a tech segment of a news channel. Within a decade, Jonathan became a millionaire many times over. His company, J. Ruth Innovations, was rumored to be on the brink of going public, promising to catapult his net worth into the stratosphere. Their lifestyle changed drastically. A penthouse in Manhattan, a sprawling estate in the Hamptons, even invitations to galas and charity events, frequently hosted by philanthropic luminaries. Evelyn and Jonathan once found themselves sharing canapes with the likes of Bill Gates at a fundraising dinner. While Jonathan thrived in this glittering world, Evelyn struggled at times to hold on to her sense of identity. She was proud of Jonathan, but felt overshadowed by the demands of his business dealings and constant traveling. Despite occasional friction, they remained a strong team, forging a partnership built on trust, loyalty, and shared aspirations. Little did Jonathan know that soon his carefully built kingdom would crumble, all because he opened his life and heart to someone else. A woman who promised him excitement, a spark he feared he'd lost in the day-to-day familiarity of marriage. One late summer evening, Jonathan found himself at an exclusive fundraiser at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Evelyn, preoccupied with a project for her non-profit, had chosen to stay home. Jonathan, reeling from a stressful negotiation process to take J. Ruth Innovations public, debated whether to cancel as well. But these events were essential for networking, so he attended, albeit reluctantly. Dressed in a sleek midnight blue suit, Jonathan drifted from one conversation to the next. A swirl of elegant gowns, black tie suits, and the soft glow of overhead chandeliers set the scene. String quartets played in the background as donors and socialites discussed everything from philanthropic efforts to the latest business trends. And then he saw her across the room, Bianca Rossi. She was tall, with dark, cascading hair and an aura of confidence that made her impossible to ignore. She wore a crimson silk dress that hugged her curves perfectly, leaving the onlookers, men and women alike, spellbound. Jonathan watched as she laughed effortlessly, touching the arm of an older gentleman who was explaining some detail about the exhibit. Something about her seemed entirely at ease, yet slightly dangerous, like a candle flame flickering in the dark. He didn't realize he was staring until Bianca's piercing brown eyes locked onto his. She offered him a half smile, a silent invitation. Normally, Jonathan would have stayed on the periphery he was, despite his wealth, not a womanizer. He valued his marriage, or so he told himself. Yet that night, something in the tension of the preceding months, the dissatisfaction stirring in his spirit, made him walk toward her. They struck up a conversation that at first felt surprisingly ordinary. They commented on the art pieces, the turnout of the event, the excellence of the hors d'oeuvres. But beneath the casual banter, Jonathan felt an undercurrent, a magnetic pull from her that he couldn't resist. Bianca's eyes never left his, and her voice, laced with an Italian accent, caressed each word as though it were a precious gift. An hour felt like a minute. By the time the night ended, Bianca had made her intentions clear. She wished to see more of Jonathan. When he tried to exchange just phone numbers, she pressed a small embossed card into his palm with her personal address in Manhattan. The act was daring, unconventional, and it electrified him. As they parted, he couldn't stop replaying her last words. "Come find me when you're ready for something different." Days went by. Jonathan tried to focus on his company's upcoming IPO. He spent long hours in the office, preparing for investor meetings, coordinating with the marketing team, and smoothing out the final details with legal advisors. Yet the memory of Bianca's face and voice cut through his concentration like a blade. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that crimson dress and her inviting smile. He attempted to shake off the temptation, reminding himself how much he loved Evelyn. She was the one who stood by him when he had nothing. She was his partner in every sense. But the more he told himself to stay away, the stronger the urge became. Finally, one night, fueled by whiskey and the stress of near-constant business calls, he found himself in a taxi, heading to the address on Bianca's card. Bianca greeted him at the door of an upscale apartment building on the edge of Central Park. The doorman let him in after a nod from her. Bianca's apartment was as alluring as she was. Every piece of furniture curated an intoxicating scent of jasmine and floor-to-ceiling windows, showcasing the city lights. She led him to her living room, offering him a glass of red wine that seemed to swirl with hidden promises. Jonathan felt out of his depth. He had never stepped out on Evelyn before. But Bianca's confidence, the subtle brush of her hand on his, and the whispered compliments disarmed him. The conversation flowed from world travel to art, from business to personal dreams. Bianca had a knack for feigning genuine interest in everything he said. She leaned in close, letting her perfume envelop him. Eventually, Jonathan couldn't resist. He leaned forward, and in the hush of that luxurious living room, they shared their first illicit kiss. It was like a drug, intense, thrilling, tinged with the sharp bite of guilt. That night marked the start of an affair that would shift Jonathan's entire existence off its axis. Affairs rarely remain secrets for long, especially not in the tight-knit circles of Manhattan's high society. Whispers sprouted. People saw Jonathan and Bianca dining at discreet corners of exclusive restaurants, or stepping out of black SUVs to attend private art shows where Evelyn was nowhere to be seen. Gossip columns started hinting at trouble in paradise for the Rutherfords. Paparazzi staked out near Jonathan's penthouse, hoping to catch a telling photo. Still, Jonathan believed he could keep everything under control. He rationalized his behavior. He still loved Evelyn, and he told himself he just needed an escape, a temporary thrill. But Bianca wanted more. She pressed him to spend more nights with her. She left suggestive gifts at his office, once sending him a handmade Italian silk tie with a note that read, "Something to remember me by in your boring board meetings." Torn between guilt and desire, Jonathan found excuses to be away from home for entire weekends. Eventually, Evelyn began asking questions. She noticed the change in his demeanor, how he kept his phone close, how he looked away when receiving late-night texts, how he no longer seemed as enthusiastic about planning their future. The once unshakable foundation of their marriage trembled. One Sunday afternoon, Evelyn confronted Jonathan. She demanded honesty, but he lied, insisting work pressures consumed him. She believed him at first. After all, Jonathan had a board of directors breathing down his neck about the IPO timeline. But suspicion lingered in her eyes. Jonathan's affair continued in secret rendezvous and stolen moments, and Bianca, sensing her grip on him tightening, began sowing seeds of dissatisfaction in Jonathan's mind. She spoke of how they could be unstoppable if he were free from all his old obligations. She fed his vanity, praising his intelligence, wealth, and power. Before Jonathan realized it, he was relying on Bianca for emotional validation he once received from his wife. Within months, Bianca's hold over Jonathan reached a fever pitch. She was no longer content being the secret. She wanted everything: his public commitment, his wealth, his devotion. Although Jonathan still felt pangs of love and loyalty for Evelyn, his marriage had grown cold and distant. The heated arguments, the prolonged silences, and the weariness on Evelyn's face all took their toll. In a move that stunned Jonathan, Bianca delivered an ultimatum. Over a lavish dinner in her apartment, she poured a vintage Bordeaux for both of them, then stated calmly, "If you want me to stay in your life, I need you to end things with Evelyn. I want you without any traces of your past." Jonathan felt a surge of panic. While he had fantasized about a future with Bianca, he had never seriously considered leaving Evelyn. There was more at stake than just an emotional bond. Their finances, business partnerships, and even their social standing were intertwined. A public divorce, especially one precipitated by an affair, would damage his reputation and quite possibly spook investors right before the IPO. But Bianca was unrelenting. She knew exactly how to play her hand. She threatened to spill every secret to the media if Jonathan didn't comply. "I have proof, messages, photos, gifts you've given me," she said with a smooth confidence. "You know the tabloids would devour it. What would that do to your company? Your precious IPO trapped by desire and fear of exposure?" Jonathan found himself cornered. He thought about denying her, about calling her bluff, but he doubted she was bluffing. He had written her incriminating emails, left voicemails. The evidence was there for anyone who wanted to tear down his carefully built empire. But the heart is unpredictable. For Jonathan, a part of him had already started seeing a new beginning with Bianca, someone who matched his ambitions, someone who knew how to navigate Manhattan's high society with effortless charm. Gradually, he convinced himself that perhaps his marriage with Evelyn had run its course. And so, with trembling resolve, he agreed to file for divorce. Telling Evelyn was the hardest thing Jonathan had ever done. Late one evening, after a silent dinner in their penthouse, he mustered the courage to speak the words that would shatter her world. He confessed to wanting a divorce, leaving out the affair for the moment. Evelyn stared at him, stunned. Why, she asked, tears brimming. "We can work through whatever is happening. I still love you, Jonathan. I've always loved you." But Jonathan, under Bianca's spell and fearing Bianca's threats, stuck to a script of half-truths and vague accusations. He claimed they had grown too far apart, that maybe they wanted different things, that they needed to go their separate ways. The devastation on Evelyn's face was clear. She pleaded for therapy for any chance to salvage their relationship. But Jonathan, seeing no way out of the corner he'd been painted into, insisted that they should part. He avoided eye contact as he walked to the guest room. By the end of the week, he had moved out, taking a suite at the Plaza Hotel under a discreet alias, just as Bianca had suggested. The news of the separation leaked rapidly, intensifying rumors of Jonathan's infidelity. Although Evelyn tried to save face publicly, the heartbreak was evident. She moved back to their older residence in upstate New York to escape the prying eyes of reporters. Friends who had known them for years offered her sympathy and tried to glean information, but she stayed mostly silent. As Jonathan prepared for the divorce proceedings, Evelyn hired a lawyer to protect her interests, though her main concern remained the emotional betrayal. She still knew nothing about Bianca, but she suspected there had to be another woman. Jonathan's legal team was large and expensive, just as Bianca had recommended. The lawyers pressed Evelyn for a speedy settlement, leveraging the fact that Jonathan's wealth was mostly tied to the soon-to-be public company. Meanwhile, Jonathan felt torn between shame and the exhilarating sense that his life was transforming into something new and glamorous. Bianca, for her part, was thrilled. She made her presence known in Jonathan's world, showing up at business dinners and charity functions on his arm. Their relationship, once secret, turned into a public affair that made headlines on gossip websites. Millionaire tech mogul dumps wife for mysterious beauty, read one. Another sensational headline teased behind the scenes of Jonathan Rutherford's scandalous romance. Evelyn's legal team attempted to secure a fair share of Jonathan's assets. She had been with him from the beginning, after all. But Bianca urged Jonathan to keep the settlement as low as possible, citing that a huge payout to Evelyn would hamper their new life. Jonathan's own guilt led him to offer more than Bianca wanted. In repeated arguments, Bianca insisted that Evelyn deserved nothing beyond a basic settlement. One day she snarled, "She never believed in you like I do. She was content with you being just a good husband, not a visionary leader. Don't let her walk away with your future." The irony was lost on Jonathan, who still saw Bianca as the greatest supporter he'd ever had, even though he had built his entire empire with Evelyn's unwavering help. As the divorce proceedings inched forward, tensions soared. Jonathan's IPO was delayed due to the negative press swirling around the scandal. Investors grew nervous about the stability of J. Ruth Innovations, with its CEO embroiled in a public split. Bianca, meanwhile, skillfully played the supportive partner, hosting lavish parties in her apartment, where Jonathan could woo anxious investors. She whispered to them stories of Jonathan's brilliance, praising him, while slyly reminding them how committed she was to seeing him succeed. Slowly the tide turned, and the IPO was back on the horizon. But behind Bianca's bold gestures of loyalty lay a cunning plan only she knew the full extent of. At last, a settlement was reached. The divorce was made final in a Manhattan court, with Evelyn receiving a considerable sum, though notably less than half of Jonathan's existing wealth. Her lawyer advised her to fight for more, but Evelyn was emotionally exhausted. She wanted closure, and to move on to heal from the betrayal. The judge signed the decree, and with that, Evelyn left the courtroom in tears. Jonathan returned to Bianca's lavish apartment, feeling a confusing mix of relief and sorrow. He told himself that, now that the divorce was behind him, he could focus on the future. Perhaps with Bianca's dynamic personality at his side, he could scale greater heights. But a part of him mourned the end of his marriage and the love he once shared with Evelyn. Late at night, he'd stare out the window at the city lights, wondering if he had made a catastrophic mistake. Bianca, however, appeared nothing but triumphant. she organized a celebratory dinner at Le Bernardin. In the glow of candlelight and the buzz of Manhattan's culinary elite, she clinked glasses of champagne with Jonathan. They toasted to new beginnings and unbridled success. Yet if Jonathan had looked more carefully, he might have noticed the calculated gleam in Bianca's eyes, or how she seemed more interested in talking about his assets' upcoming IPO and expansion deals than about him as a person. That very evening, Jonathan inadvertently revealed his plans for restructuring his finances post-IPO. He spoke of setting up a private fund, of shifting certain assets into easily liquidated stocks. Bianca listened attentively, nodding at all the right moments. By the time dessert arrived, she had gleaned enough details to formulate a cunning scheme. The day after the divorce was finalized, Jonathan received a call from one of his old college friends, Marcus Lynn, who had known both Jonathan and Evelyn since their freshman year. Marcus was a straight shooter, known for always speaking his mind. Without preamble, Marcus said, "John, I've been hearing things about Bianca. I don't think she's who she says she is." Jonathan bristled with defensiveness. "You don't even know her," he snapped. "What could you possibly have heard?" Marcus hesitated, but pressed on. "There are rumors. People say she was involved with a wealthy banker in London. A few years back, Robert Hastings rang a bell. He ended up losing. A fortune vanished from the social scene. She jumped ship right before everything fell apart for him. It said that she left with a ton of his money. Maybe it's all talk, but there's enough chatter to be concerning." Jonathan's pride flared. He refused to entertain the possibility that Bianca might be conning him. After all, he was a savvy businessman. He had built an empire from scratch. How could he be fooled? He brushed off Marcus's warnings with an icy "thanks for your concern. But I know what I'm doing." Then he ended the call. Yet a seed of doubt was planted. Over the following days, Jonathan began recalling small inconsistencies in Bianca's stories, conflicting details about her family, about how she earned her money, about the places she claimed to have lived. He tried asking her subtle questions, but Bianca was adept at swiftly changing the subject. She'd distract him with flattery or physical affection whenever he probed deeper. At times, Jonathan noticed an unsettling quality in Bianca's eyes, like a cat sizing up its prey. But each time the alarm bells chimed, Bianca's charm overpowered his hesitation. He convinced himself that the rumors were mere gossip, spread by people envious of their relationship. Despite the turbulence of Jonathan's personal life, J. Ruth Innovations finally launched its IPO. The opening day on the New York Stock Exchange was a triumph. Stock prices soared, surpassing even the most optimistic projections. Jonathan rang the closing bell, wearing a triumphant smile, while Bianca stood by his side in a stylish white suit, beaming for the cameras. The press devoured every moment newly divorced tech mogul triumphs, with stunning IPO launch, blared the business headlines. That evening, an exclusive after-party was thrown at an upscale penthouse venue. Investors, celebrities, and tech industry heavyweights rubbed shoulders. Bianca played the role of charming hostess, impeccably draping herself on Jonathan's arm, ensuring each high-profile guest felt special. Evelyn was nowhere to be seen. She had been swiftly replaced in the public imagination by Bianca, the it girl, next to the newly minted billionaire. If Jonathan felt any trace of guilt or sadness, he concealed it behind the $1,000,000 smile expected of him. In private, Jonathan felt relief and a surge of pride. He'd finally reached the pinnacle of success he had long sought. Financial freedom was now absolute. He mused that perhaps everything his affair, the divorce, might have been worth it for this moment. With Bianca eager to explore new ventures, new mansions, and new investments, he imagined they would become a power couple to rival any in Manhattan. Unnoticed in the corner of the party, one of Bianca's acquaintances, a slick man named Darian Kendall, quietly sipped his champagne. An ex-private investigator and rumored blackmailer, Darian had ties to more than one suspicious incident in the city. For a moment, Jonathan and Darian's eyes met. An uneasy chill swept through Jonathan, though he couldn't quite place why. Bianca smiled at Darian from across the room, a knowing smile that left Jonathan perplexed. She then quickly pulled Jonathan away to introduce him to yet another VIP. The moment passed, but an intangible sense of dread lingered, flush with IPO wealth. Jonathan and Bianca relocated to a grand penthouse overlooking Central Park. Ornate fixtures and museum-worthy art pieces adorned every corner. Bianca took pleasure in redecorating importing hand-woven rugs from Morocco, ordering custom-made Italian furniture, and commissioning original paintings from up-and-coming artists. The cost soared into the millions. Jonathan said nothing, telling himself that he deserved this level of luxury after all his hard work. In between lavish shopping trips and glamorous parties, Bianca urged Jonathan to sign over certain assets in her name. Just a precaution, she insisted in case of legal or tax complications. He hesitated, but she used every method of persuasion at her disposal, her charm, their physical intimacy, and the convenient mention of the fear that Evelyn might try to reopen the divorce settlement if J. Ruth Innovations soared too high. Eventually, Jonathan relented. He signed over several properties into a trust that listed Bianca as a co-owner. After all, they were practically engaged, discussing wedding plans to formalize their union. The media devoured the love story, from rags to riches tech. Genius finds true love after divorce. Neither Jonathan nor Bianca contested the false notion that she was his newfound soulmate. The public had grown fascinated with them. Paparazzi followed them on exotic vacations to Saint-Tropez, Aspen, Bali. Everywhere they went, Bianca made sure to post carefully curated social media updates that showcased their extravagant lifestyle, fueling admiration and envy in equal measure. Behind the scenes, some cracks appeared. Bianca's temper flared if Jonathan questioned her spending or asked to see receipts. Arguments escalated quickly, only to be patched over by luxurious gifts or steamy makeup sessions. Jonathan's old friends scarcely recognized him. They noticed how Bianca controlled the conversation, how Jonathan seemed more guarded, more isolated from those who once grounded him. Still, Jonathan pushed aside any trepidation. He poured more money into their life together, certain that he was building the future he had always dreamed of. The new circle of acquaintances surrounding him offered hollow sycophancy, while the true friends from his past found themselves kept at arm's length. Beneath the glitzy veneer, a storm brewed. Slowly, Jonathan noticed strange financial discrepancies. Unauthorized transfers, suspicious charges, and large sums moving between accounts he had never opened. Each time he brought it up to Bianca, she waved away his concerns. "Oh, my accountant must have mislabeled the accounts. I'll sort it out." Or she would flash him a disarming smile, reminding him of how stressful it was to manage their blossoming fortune. Simultaneously, Darian Kendall lurked at the edges of their life, appearing at parties, dropping by Bianca's gatherings unannounced. Jonathan found him unnerving. Whenever Jonathan asked Bianca about Darian, she claimed he was an old friend who helped her set up her real estate ventures. Jonathan's gut twisted. Something about Darian's gaze, calculating predatory, put him on edge. But Bianca was so persuasive in dismissing Jonathan's fears that he let them slide. Nevertheless, Jonathan's old friend Marcus refused to stay silent. Marcus arranged a discreet meeting with Jonathan, away from the paparazzi's watchful eyes. In a dimly lit bar on the Lower East Side, Marcus revealed what he'd uncovered. Bianca's real last name wasn't Rossi. It had changed multiple times over the past decade. She'd been implicated, though never charged, in a series of financial fraud investigations in Europe and Asia. Several men who had been involved with her suffered mysterious bankruptcies and left the social scene in disgrace. Jonathan felt as though the rug had been pulled out from under him. But his ego chafed at the possibility he'd been conned. He lashed out at Marcus, accusing him of meddling and refusing to trust Bianca. "She's changed," Jonathan said through gritted teeth. "People can have complicated pasts. This is just gossip." Marcus shook his head. "I hope you're right, John, but I'm telling you there's more to this. Watch your back." With that, Marcus left the bar, his face etched with concern. Jonathan was left nursing a drink that tasted bitter, no matter how sweet the bourbon. Returning to the penthouse, Jonathan didn't confront Bianca immediately. Instead, he began quietly checking his accounts more thoroughly. He noticed that shortly after his divorce settlement, a series of funds had been diverted to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. He couldn't recall setting up such an arrangement. He consulted his personal attorney off the record, asking about the nature of these accounts. The lawyer seemed puzzled. It looked like Jonathan's electronic signature authorized them. However, if one looked closely, the digital signatures were slightly inconsistent with Jonathan's usual pattern. "Digital forgery has gotten more sophisticated," the attorney said, a frown creasing his forehead. "Are you saying you didn't sign these?" Jonathan maintained a calm facade, but inside panic bubbled. He realized the looming possibility that Bianca, or someone working with her, could have forged his authorization. But confronting her would require evidence, and Jonathan suspected she'd be furious if cornered. His fear of scandal, of public humiliation, prevented him from moving openly. The tabloids would devour every lurid detail of a second betrayal. Even worse, the stockholders in his company might lose confidence in his leadership if it became clear that he'd been duped. Gradually, Jonathan decided to play along while gathering more evidence. He re-established discreet contact with Evelyn, not to rekindle romance, but to apologize for how things ended. He also sought to verify if Bianca had tried to sabotage Evelyn in any financial dealings. Evelyn still hurt, but Civil told him her legal team discovered suspicious questions about her settlement. The investigators representing Bianca had tried to pry into Evelyn's personal finances, apparently looking for anything that could reduce her payout. Evelyn's lawyers fortunately held their ground. As the days passed, Bianca sensed Jonathan was more distant, more distracted. She intensified her hold, demanding more attention, planning weekend getaways, spontaneously suggesting they look at private islands to purchase. She effectively isolated Jonathan from everyone except her new set of friends. Still, he concealed the emotional turmoil behind a polite smile, all the while building up a trove of suspicious documents and bank statements. The late afternoon sun cast long amber shadows across the marble floors of the penthouse. Jonathan stood by the window, a tumbler of scotch untouched in his hand, watching as the city blurred beneath him. Horns honked in the distance, helicopters buzzed overhead, but inside all was still. On the coffee table before him sat a carefully arranged stack of documents, bank records, wire transfers, and signature authorizations that made his stomach churn. He had rehearsed what he would say 100 times, but now that the moment was here, his mouth felt dry, and his thoughts scattered. The elevator chimed. Footsteps clicked against the floor. Bianca entered with the air of a woman returning from a victorious hunt, clad in a cream-colored designer dress, a silk scarf draped over her shoulders, and shopping bags dangling from one arm. She paused when she saw Jonathan standing so still. "Darling," she said brightly, "you're home early. I found the most exquisite lamp for the guest bedroom. We need to talk," Jonathan said flatly. Bianca blinked. "Is something wrong?" "Sit down." Her brows arched, but she sauntered over, setting the shopping bags on a velvet ottoman and sinking into the tufted leather couch. She crossed her legs and looked at him expectantly. "Okay. I'm listening." Jonathan moved to the table and picked up one sheet of paper. He didn't hand it to her, just held it up. "Explain this," he said. "A transfer of $5 million to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, authorized under my name. Except I never made it." Bianca didn't blink. "That's absurd." "Maybe your financial advisor," I spoke to him, Jonathan cut in. "He had no idea. Neither did my lawyer or my accountant. So either someone hacked into my accounts or—" He leaned forward, voice low and razor sharp. "You forged my authorization." Bianca's lips parted the first crack in her otherwise flawless mask. "Are you accusing me of stealing from you?" Jonathan dropped the document on the table and pulled out another, and another. Transfers. Trust alterations. Deeds. Her name was on everything. "I'm not accusing you," he said. "I'm showing you the evidence." Bianca's eyes narrowed, but she kept her tone even. "You've always been paranoid when you're stressed. Maybe you're just overwhelmed." "I had the signatures examined," Jonathan said. "Digital forensics. They match my signature almost. But not exactly. Enough for a court to question authenticity. Want to know what else they found?" He stepped back and pointed toward a folder labeled Bianca Rossi. "Aliases. You've changed your last name 4 times in 10 years. Bianca De Laurentiis in Milan. Bianca Varela in Singapore. Bianca Moore in London. Each identity is tied to a man with money who ended up broke or vanished from society." A long silence followed. Bianca didn't move. "Who are you?" Jonathan asked, quieter now. "Really?" Bianca's expression softened for a second. Then it hardened. She reached for her phone and stood. "I don't think you want to go down this road, Jonathan," she said smoothly. "You have a lot more to lose than I do." "Is that a threat?" he said. Heart-pounding. She opened a folder on her phone and turned it toward him. Dozens of screenshots, their texts, photos, voicemails, some romantic, some foolish, and others devastating if taken out of context. "If I go down," Bianca whispered, "I'll take you with me. These will be on every gossip site, every news channel by morning. Let's not forget your IPO. How do you think investors will react when they find out their golden boy got conned by his girlfriend and covered it up?" Jonathan clenched his fists. "You blackmailed me once into divorcing Evelyn. Now you want to do it again." "You're the one who gave me everything," Bianca hissed. "All I did was accept." Jonathan stared at her cold reality, crystallizing in his mind. She never loved him. She never even liked him. He was just the next mark. Bianca moved closer, her perfume sickening now. "I suggest you stop this little investigation of yours. Smile for the cameras. Keep playing the happy couple, and I'll let you keep what's left of your reputation." "I'm not afraid of you," he said, though his voice cracked. "You should be." For a long time, neither of them moved. Then Bianca gave a small smile, serene and sinister. She turned on her heel and walked to the bedroom. Jonathan collapsed onto the couch, the breath leaving his lungs in one shuddering gust. He'd spent years building an empire, yet he had never felt so small, so helpless, so utterly played. But even as fear wrapped its claws around him, something else stirred resolve. Bianca had underestimated him, and maybe that would be her first mistake. For days after the confrontation, the penthouse was a battleground wrapped in velvet and crystal. Bianca drifted through the space like nothing had changed, slipping into designer gowns and spraying her expensive perfume, hosting dinners, smiling for photographers. But something in her had shifted. Jonathan could feel it. Her movements were too calculated, her eyes too alert. She barely spoke to him now, unless it was in icy sarcasm or veiled threats. Jonathan tried to keep up appearances. At business functions, he wore his tailored suits and gave confident sound bites about expansion and growth. But behind the scenes, he was unraveling. Every night he lay awake, watching shadows dance on the ceiling, knowing that the woman beside him might ruin him with a single push of a button. His legal team worked around the clock, quietly preparing for the worst. His lawyers suggested trying to reverse the transfers or petitioning the court for injunctions, but with many of the assets already signed over, or worse, liquidated, their hands were tied. And if Bianca leaked the photos and messages she held, public sympathy would evaporate. Jonathan's only card left was silence. Then came the breaking point. One morning he returned from a breakfast meeting with his CFO to find the penthouse in disarray. It was subtle at first, drawers open a shattered wine glass in the kitchen sink. But as he moved from room to room, a knot of dread twisted tighter in his chest. The safe in his study was ajar. The folders with property deeds, offshore account ledgers, and private documents were gone. Bianca, he called. No answer. He checked her walk-in closet, empty hangers, jewelry cases, all gone. Her perfume bottles still lined the vanity, but the drawers beneath had been cleared out. He walked into the kitchen, numb, and there, placed neatly on the marble counter, was an envelope with his name on it. He opened it. Inside, in Bianca's graceful slanted handwriting, were just 6 words: "You had your chance. Now it's mine." Jonathan staggered backward. Panic overtook him like a wave of ice water. He rushed to his laptop, opening his financial dashboard. The numbers didn't lie. 3 accounts drained. A luxury Hamptons property listed as sold. Company shares under his trust partially transferred to a dummy shell corporation. His heart pounded so hard he could barely think. He tried calling Bianca's phone, disconnected. He called their shared attorney. No response. He called his security firm and ordered them to review building footage. By noon, the head of building operations called him back. Bianca had left the building the night before with 2 men in dark suits, one of whom appeared to be Darian Kendall. Jonathan stared blankly at the wall. Darian, the quiet, eerie man who had lingered around their events. Jonathan had dismissed him as a hanger-on. Now he realized Darian had likely orchestrated the entire escape. Muscle, logistics, threats. He remembered the black SUV that had followed him the past week. At the time, he'd thought it might be paparazzi. Now he wasn't so sure. He called his lead attorney. "She's gone," Jonathan said hoarsely. "And she took everything." His legal team launched into emergency mode. They filed injunctions, contacted international financial institutions, alerted authorities. But Bianca had planned this meticulously. The accounts were in jurisdictions with strict secrecy laws. Shell companies obscured ownership trails. The homes and vehicles she'd sold were already in the names of intermediaries. Jonathan had no illusions recovering any of it would take years, if ever. And the humiliation would be public. 2 days later, the tabloids broke the story. Tech mogul's Mistress vanishes with fortune, screamed one headline. Another blared, from power, couple to public disaster. Photos of Bianca boarding a private jet at Teterboro Airport with Darian at her side flooded the gossip columns. A source claimed she used a fake name and paid cash for the flight. Customs had her final destination as the Virgin Islands. From there, nothing. Jonathan had hoped to control the narrative, but the press did what it did best: devour reputations. Old photos of Evelyn appeared in contrast, the loyal wife cast aside. Social media swirled with memes of Jonathan in clown makeup captions, like, "He lost the bag and the girl." Worse still, The board of J. Ruth Innovations demanded an emergency session. Though the company remained financially healthy, investors were nervous. Questions were raised. Had Jonathan mismanaged personal finances? Was his judgment compromised? One board member gently but firmly asked the unthinkable, "Would you consider stepping down at least temporarily? So we can stabilize the brand." Jonathan said nothing for a long time. Then he nodded. That night, sitting alone in a smaller apartment, he'd forgotten he owned Jonathan, stared at the city that once crowned him king. His phone buzzed. It was Evelyn, just a single message. "I'm sorry this happened to you." He didn't deserve her sympathy. But somehow it broke him. He sank into the couch and wept, not just for the money, not just for the humiliation, but for how willingly he'd handed his life to someone who had only ever seen him as prey. He had been seduced by fantasy. The next few weeks were a blur of chaos. Jonathan's attorneys scrambled to halt any further liquidation of assets, but Bianca had moved swiftly. Large wire transfers had vanished into overseas accounts. Shell companies with complex ownership structures obscured the money's final destination. Tabloids got wind of the scandal, publishing sensational articles: "Mistress breaks tech billionaire's heart and bank account." They dug up every detail of Jonathan's divorce, from Evelyn painting him as a serial philanderer who had gotten his comeuppance. For every ounce of sympathy he received, he was also the butt of jokes, memes, circulated online, mocking his downfall. The blow to his reputation was severe. His company's board members tried to distance themselves from the scandal. Though J. Ruth Innovations remained stable financially, some stakeholders questioned Jonathan's leadership. They convened an emergency meeting to discuss whether his personal issues jeopardized the company's image. With mounting pressure, Jonathan announced he would temporarily step down as CEO, appointing a trusted colleague as interim leader, while he focused on resolving personal matters. Meanwhile, Jonathan tried in vain to trace Bianca. Private investigators discovered that she had boarded a private jet from Teterboro Airport under a false name. Customs records placed her final destination in the Caribbean. From there, her trail vanished. Darian Kendall was rumored to have accompanied her, or at least traveled on a similar itinerary. The investigators strongly suspected they had either used forged documents to continue traveling, or had found sanctuary in a jurisdiction with strict banking secrecy laws. Even more humiliating, Jonathan discovered that the forged signatures dated back months, indicating Bianca had planned her escape long before their confrontation. She had forced him to divorce Evelyn to cut off any claims Evelyn might have on the stolen fortune. Jonathan realized with a sickening jolt that he had unwittingly destroyed the person who truly loved him for the sake of a woman who viewed him as nothing but a resource to be exploited. In the aftermath, Jonathan was left reeling emotionally and financially. Though not entirely bankrupt, his fortune was dramatically diminished. Properties that Bianca had sold were gone for good, and the offshore funds might never be recovered. The press ate up every scandalous detail, further tarnishing Jonathan's once sterling public image as a visionary entrepreneur. He holed himself up in a smaller apartment he still owned downtown, one that Bianca had never touched. Alone in the dimly lit living room, he stared at the city lights with a sense of profound loss. Sleep eluded him. Guilt weighed heavily. He thought of Evelyn, the memories they shared, and how he had cast her aside. He drafted apology letters he never sent, typed out text messages he deleted. Above all, he regretted not heeding the warnings from Marcus, from friends, even from the pangs of conscience that occasionally haunted him during the affair. Evelyn, upon hearing the news, sent him a brief email that read, "I'm sorry this happened to you. I genuinely hope you find peace, but we can't undo what's been done." It was an olive branch of empathy, though it didn't promise reconciliation. Jonathan realized he had irreversibly broken something precious, and no amount of remorse would mend it. He replied with a simple heartfelt, "I'm so sorry. Thank you for everything." Desperate to salvage what remained of his life, Jonathan returned to the basics. He found respite in the same disciplined work ethic that had once propelled him from a modest upbringing to the heights of success. He sought therapy to address the guilt and confusion. He reconnected with some old friends, including Marcus, who helped him navigate the next steps without judgment. Legally, the authorities began investigating the fraud, but Bianca and Darian had covered their tracks well. At best, the investigators could charge them in absentia and issue international warrants. Recovering the stolen money was another matter entirely. A labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore secrecy laws likely protected Bianca's new nest egg. Jonathan's lawyers warned him it could take years, if ever, to recover a fraction of what was stolen. Meanwhile, J. Ruth Innovations stabilized under new leadership. Some board members urged Jonathan to sell his remaining stake and retire from the public eye. In a moment of clarity, Jonathan decided to hold on to his shares. He recognized that despite the scandal, the company was still his brainchild, and it held the potential to innovate and grow. Away from Manhattan's social scene, Jonathan gradually found a sliver of relief. He stepped away from parties and galas, focusing on meaningful pursuits. He quietly donated to causes Evelyn once cared about: women's shelters, education programs for underprivileged youth, though he did so anonymously. This was his small penance, his way of honoring the values he once shared with the woman he had so deeply wronged. Months rolled into a year, then 2. The media frenzy diminished. A new scandal, a different sensational story replaced Jonathan's downfall in the tabloids. He kept his head down, working from a modest office and occasionally consulting for J. Ruth Innovations. He no longer had that manic hunger for more wealth, more power, more success. The illusions that once blinded him had been stripped away. Still, the ghosts lingered. Bianca was never apprehended, though rumors occasionally bubbled up about sightings in Monte Carlo, Dubai, or private yachts off the coast of the Mediterranean. Jonathan learned to let go of the obsession with finding her. He recognized that the heartbreak, the betrayal, the financial losses were the consequences of his own actions and weaknesses. Forgiveness was hard to come by, especially self-forgiveness. Jonathan spent many therapy sessions delving into why he craved Bianca's excitement. He realized he had been seduced by not just Bianca, but by the notion that his life must constantly ascend to greater thrills. In his chase for external validation, he had lost the stability and depth that came from a real partnership. In time, Jonathan reached out to Evelyn again, more sincerely. Their conversations were guarded, but civil, then gradually became friendly. She had moved on with her life, finding work in community development, and it was whispered a new relationship that treated her with kindness and respect. There was no romantic reunion, no fairy tale ending for them, but they found a measure of closure, acknowledging that once upon a time they had shared a powerful love. With distance from the scandal, Jonathan began quietly rebuilding. He founded a philanthropic arm of his company to invest in educational programs, much like the ones that had shaped him in childhood. He sought to do good in ways he had neglected while chasing personal ambition. And in small pockets of time, he rediscovered simple pleasures: reading, hiking, watching the sunrise instead of partying until dawn. Though the scars remained, Jonathan embraced them as a painful lesson. He was neither fully undone nor entirely redeemed. He was a man who had been brought to his knees by temptation, betrayed by the illusions he cherished, and ultimately forced to reckon with the reality of his flawed humanity. 2 years after Bianca disappeared with his fortune, Jonathan Rutherford stood on the balcony of a modest brownstone in Brooklyn, far from the glittering penthouses he once knew. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. He sipped his coffee, reflecting on the path that led him here. The tabloids had long forgotten his saga. The company he founded continued to thrive, albeit under new guidance. And Evelyn, the woman he had once loved so deeply, was finding happiness on her own terms. The world had changed, as it always does. Jonathan's illusions of invulnerability were shattered. Yet in the shards, he found a clearer reflection of himself. He was a man capable of poor choices, but also a man willing to learn and grow. The price he paid was enormous. His marriage, a chunk of his fortune, his pride. But the experience imparted a deeper wisdom. If there was any consolation, it lay in the hope that the lessons he had learned would guide him to a more grounded, more honest life. He closed his eyes, letting the morning sunlight warm his face. No longer the tabloid's favorite or the darling of high society, Jonathan Rutherford was just a person, flawed, vulnerable, and very much human. And for the first time in a long while, that felt strangely freeing. In the end, Jonathan Rutherford's fall from grace became a cautionary tale, powerful proof that even towering fortunes and lofty ambitions can crumble when built on secrets and betrayal. What began as a desperate search for excitement and validation ended in heartbreak, public humiliation, and the loss of untold millions. Yet from the wreckage, he found a thread of redemption in humility, self-reflection, and a return to the simple values he once cherished. If you've been captivated by the twists and turns of this real-life drama fiction, remember that every choice we make can lead us closer to or farther from our truest selves. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that uncover the hidden truths behind power, passion, and the human heart. Join our community and stay tuned for more enthralling tales coming your way. Your support keeps these stories alive.